Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Is everything logistics really? Well, we're going to find out from our next guest here in the hot seat. Please welcome Blythe Brumleve, host of the Everything is Logistics podcast. Blythe, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Well, I'm excited as well. Before we heat things up a little bit, why don't you just take 30 seconds? I mean, you got a lot of stuff cooking right now, but give us a sense of kind of the things that you're working on right now.
So things I'm working on right now is about it's starting in January of this year. I became a full-time podcaster, and it's been something that I have been working towards since 2014. I've been creating content online in some capacity since 2007. So it's been a little bit of a long journey. I guess, for most folks, they say it's an overnight thing. Definitely was not for me. Then I also run a business called Digital Dispatch, where I help freight companies get online and grow. So those are my main two projects right now.
So thank you for that. Number one. So let's just start with the why. I mean, I've seen you in action. Clearly, there's a passion for this industry. Where does that come from? You could be doing podcasting in any context. I mean, what is it about the logistics world that has got you so engaged? Just from how you invest in the space.
So I actually, when I started a blog back in 2007, it was a sports and entertainment blog. I wanted to teach my girlfriends how to understand the same things that I was really passionate about. So sort of in a selfish way to teach them about, different sporting events and why they're so fun and also like gaming and entertainment thing, typical things that were thought of as for the men. I wanted my girlfriends to get involved. And then shortly thereafter, social media started, and so I kind of found like my group of people, my group of women who enjoyed the same things that I enjoyed. And at that same time, in addition to starting the blog, it was a side hustle. My full-time job was working at a 3PL, what's called third party logistics company, and I was the executive assistant. And when my boss, the CEO at the time, found out about what I was doing, he said, well, why don't you start, handling all of our marketing, handling all of our digital campaigns, things like that. And so it was really like a trial by fire for me to get thrown into the world of logistics marketing. I had no idea, what this industry was all about. I just knew I came from a world of waiting tables, and I thought I would never get a desk job. I would never want to sit at a computer all day. And then, sort of fast forward to today, and that's exactly what I do. But it was one of those opportunities where it was, I had learned these different skill sets, such as building websites and creating content and marketing that content out to social media, that my boss knew, exactly. He was like, we need to have that for our company, so you can just, take it over. So it was $140 million a year company. And here I was just, given the keys to the entire ship. And so that was how I learned, about the industry. I'm still learning every single day about the industry. And I think that that is what keeps me so hooked in logistics, is because there's always a problem to be solved. There's always something new. Every time I learn something new, I realize how much more I still have left to learn. And so for me, that has been, I've always been, a lifelong, sort of learner and, stay curious. And I think that those are the keys to creating great content. And that has served me well. And this industry just keeps providing that to me.
Well, we're glad that you're here and you're making an impact clearly. So let's talk about that kind of where our worlds intersect. Us on the side, Tenney Group, working with companies to create value to ultimately exit through a sale. As part of that building value process, of course, folks have to have some type of coherent brand positioning, type commitment and effort in place. And so I'm curious, what are you seeing some of the people that you're working, what are they doing to differentiate themselves as it relates to, kind of the way that they approach media, the way that they approach their digital marketing? What are they doing that's different, that you think is ultimately affecting the way that they create value?
So there's a couple companies that in particular that are creating content really well because I see it from both sides of the aisle where honestly the overwhelming majority of my clients that I manage their websites for because that's essentially the services that I provide for digital dispatch. Most of them do not create content. Most of them have tried to create content, and
Hmm.
if they do try, it's more SEO focused, and they have given up, pretty quickly. They don't want to be on camera. They don't want to be in front of a microphone. COVID a little bit changed that, and it forced a lot of these companies and a lot of these owners to become the face of their company. And they everybody kind of either got a microphone or you got a webcam at some point during the lockdowns and working from home. And so that made other companies a little bit more comfortable with creating content and getting themselves out of the comfort zone. A lot of them still don't, but the ones that have started, I'll give you one in particular, is BCP Transport. They have like a fleet of over 300 drivers, and they started Facebook live streaming their driver safety meetings for the drivers that couldn't make it into the office. And so they had a group of drivers that were inside the office, participating in the meeting, and then they would have a group of drivers who were watching on Facebook Live. So it started becoming so successful on Facebook that they started making YouTube videos. And then the YouTube videos started turning into, well, let's take an office and let's completely gut it and let's start making content in that office. That same team now has a full service business that is separate from BCB Transport, where they're recruiting drivers, they're retaining drivers through their educational, safety driven content. But now, on the flip side, they have found so much success with creating content that they're now starting to offer those services. A trucking company is now starting to offer those
Yeah.
content marketing services, to other trucking companies within the space, because not just for the simple fact of being able to connect with their audience, connect with drivers, current and prospective, but then they're also able to save on insurance premiums
Mm.
in a world where a lot of trucking companies are seeing a dramatic increase in their insurance premiums because of the fact that they preach so much about safety. They saw another premium drop in their insurance costs 2 or 3 years in a row now because they have focused so much of their efforts on content. And I think that is a really important distinction. Is they're seeing the benefits now, but those benefits weren't evident when they were Facebook live streaming. And so being able to see that growth and that progression has been really inspirational. So there's that, aspect of it, but you also have to have talent that is able to be on camera and able to be committed to getting the reps and getting better with each and every rep.
So have you ever had a client where you're just like, hey, you have the best idea, but you are not the right person to be on the microphone? So, how does that conversation go, right?
Well, it's typically they don't want to do it at all. And I,
Yeah.
for a while, because when I started Digital Dispatch, I started the podcast to promote, pretty much talk to my client base, talk to subject matter experts in order to find out where their struggle points are and where they're finding success. And I started finding success with content. So I would start to preach to them, you need to be on camera. You need to be in the in front of a microphone. You need to be talking about these things. You need to just take your cell phone and put it up in front of you and record a 5-minute video. And I think for a lot of them, they get very scared. They get very nervous. They don't, it's a lot of those same common fears. It's the fear of equipment, the fear of perfection,
Mm.
thinking that you have to have everything perfect before you hit publish on something. And so, more times than not, a lot of folks just don't create content and
Yeah.
they get scared because they're building up all of these things in their head, and then they don't actually get to the point where they're hitting publish over and over again. And that's what it takes. So, and I spent honestly, I spent a long time trying to convince a lot of my clients to get in front of a camera, to get in front of a microphone, and take the same emails that they were making and just create a video for them instead. You can do both. It doesn't have to be either or, but the video function still freaks a lot of people out.
Yeah.
And there really only have been the one example of BCB Transport that has really taken that and run with it. Everybody else has sort of, just stayed behind and focused on more of like the SEO, focus content where it's like 3,000 words, and you just hope that, somebody that arrives on your site is going to read all of that and then, become a customer. And I think we've just seen a dramatic shift in the way people buy, the way businesses buy, and they're not converting. And so, maybe some of them are rethinking that. But it really just comes back down to they're just scared to get on camera.
No, I think that's really interesting. And you said something in terms of the fear of perfection, which I think that is, not really heard that phrase said exactly like that, but that's so interesting because you see a lot of folks that want to do content, but the reason that they won't either because they're uncomfortable, but there's not, you know, a definable outcome about what's gonna come of this. And so like you're trying to put real capital behind these types of efforts of which you don't really know how or when the return's going to be. It's just more of a gut. You feel like this is what we should be doing. And so how do you think about that? You produce an enormous amount of content. Like how do you think about um, the content that you're producing from a value standpoint versus return on investment? What's your thought process about that?
So my thought process behind content is I think a lot of businesses mess up in a sense that they're talking about it from the lens of, okay, well, how many leads am I going to get if I make this one video, versus it's the work that you put in consistently on top of each other that builds on each other,
Hmm.
that will eventually turn into leads. And I think from a marketing standpoint, I've always marketed myself out of necessity, out of bootstrapping myself. I
Hmm.
didn't have, the $50,000 that, to pay a big time marketing agency to handle my content. I didn't have that. So I had to figure it out for myself. And when I first launched the business, focus podcast, I ended up switching the name from Digital Dispatch to Everything is Logistics because the podcast kind of took off. And but originally that podcast was really meant to connect with my customers, to find out what concerns that they were going through right now so I can anticipate those needs coming down the pipeline. So it wasn't necessarily about getting the big numbers or getting 10,000 views on a video. It was, what are my customers struggling with, what are my current clients struggling with, and how can I create content to help them combat these issues. So then that way they're not just a website hosting customer of mine and a
Hmm.
maintenance customer of mine, but that
Right.
they actually see the real value in staying with me long term, because I'm going to be right there in the trenches with you. I'm going to teach you everything that I've learned
Right.
so far, and then hopefully you'll be able to pick up on that in the end. Now, as far as like measuring ROI, I have systems in place for that now, but I also still, strongly caution, any other, business out there that's thinking of starting up content. You want to worry about your specific target market, and I would always suggest to start with your customers first, because chances are whatever problems they're dealing with, other customers or other prospects are dealing with those same exact challenges. And if you can come up with solutions to solve those problems, then you can display that and you can showcase it through your content, to where even if only 5 people watch that video, those 5 people have a higher likelihood of being in your target market than if you are to just, cater to the big vanity metrics, is what I call them. So if you're trying to get the going viral and getting, 30,000 views on a video, then content is not going to be a right fit for the overwhelming majority of people, because the overwhelming majority of people do not hit those numbers unless you create content on a very consistent basis. So it's setting up, I think, those early expectations that you're probably not going to go viral. Your videos are probably going to suck for the first 6 months, but you gotta work past it. And then once you work past it, then you'll start seeing the benefits of it. And one of the, I guess, a better comparison that I've heard recently is from Chris Walker from Refine Labs, and he has a comparison that if you're going to create content, it's like going to the gym. You're not going to be able to attribute one bicep curl to a future lead that you get down the road. It's a combination of all of those efforts that is going to lead to success later on.
That's a great analogy. I like that. So let me pivot a little bit, Blythe. Let's talk about kind of you know um, the evolution of your role as a podcaster. I'm curious, like who have you found to be a great resource or source of inspiration? Other podcasters, any industry, who are some folks
Mm.
that you can point to? You said this is where I grew by paying attention to what they were doing.
So I think Gary Vaynerchuk is probably a given just because he talks about, documenting and document, don't create. So he's always been one that I look towards as far as, where should I be making moves and where should I be focused on. Other creators that really come to mind. I kind of like a lot of like the raunchy style podcast. So Flagrant 2 it has a bunch of comedians on it. I like watching their show a lot. I would also say a lot of there's a new businesswoman that I've been following. Her name is Cody Sanchez. And I've been absolutely obsessed with her and her content and the way that, she was a former Wall Street, advisor, and she built up a bunch of companies, with managing millions of dollars. But now she's transferred that into helping, smaller business owners do the same thing. And so I found value in a lot of her content as of late. And she's kind of been like a new North Star for me. So I kind of switch it up as far as the programming that I particularly enjoy, because I have a few go-tos in different industries. Odd Lots is another one that's specifically for, podcasts that comes from Bloomberg. A lot of the Freight Waves programming, I watch a lot of them as well. And then a lot of the growth of the independent podcaster just in supply chain and logistics is very dramatic over the last since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was a list of like the top 10 podcasts in supply chain and logistics, and now there's more than 100 of those podcasts that are listed in that same category. So those are probably I both industry in my industry and outside of my industry of shows that I watch and I kind of take inspiration from and kind of pick and choose of not only what they're saying but what they're doing. Meaning, if
Mm-hmm.
like the Flagrant podcast, for example, they have they upload a full video, they do a full show that's like 3 hours long, but then they'll take that video and they'll splice it up into 10 to 15-minute long clips. And, for a lot of people, they'll look at a 3 hour long show and they'll say, absolutely, I'm not watching that. But then they watch, a couple of the clips. And then because of how good the YouTube algorithm is, they'll end up watching the whole damn show by, after, a little while, just because the algorithm is so good
Yeah.
that they sat down. They were not anticipating watching that entire 3 hour show, but because they watched all the clips back to back, that's when they're going to go back and, realize that they probably could have just saved a lot more time if they just hit play on that original episode.
Well, I think that's good stuff right there, and that's a little psychology lesson for those watching as well. So let's talk about what's next for Everything is Logistics, and what can we keep our eyes on? What are you working on next?
So what I'm working on next is it sounds a little like juvenile, but the first 6 months of this podcast, it was really one of those moments where it was almost like a startup. It really felt like a startup culture for me, where it was, okay, who's going to sponsor the podcast? How am I going to justify all of this time? Because it's not just creating content, it's the research involved, it's the editing, it's the distribution, it's the interview booking. It's a whole lot of things that you don't see before you see a face on a camera.
Oh yeah.
So the first 6 months of the podcast has really been, okay, well, what kind of experts can I get on the show, and who's going to sponsor, figuring out the logistics of that. And then now with the last six, I really took the last few weeks while everybody's kind of traveling and everybody's kind of out of the office. I batched some episodes so I could take some really a few weeks that I could really sit down and think about what I want the next 6 months to look like. I'm a planner, so I would plan, the next 4 years if I could, but I know in the world of content, you can really only plan about 6 months out. So I'm excited to now, not just take experts on the show and find out about, their bio and what they've done and how they came to work in the industry and, what topics they care about, but taking a topic that a lot of people care about and then finding that guest that can be that subject matter expert that can talk in depth about that particular topic. So I kind of see it in two ways. I see it as that format, and then I have, a set amount. I've been doing this for, a few years now, that I have a set amount of recurring guests that can be those subject matter experts. So I don't have to kind of run into an issue of, is somebody going to freeze up as soon as they, get on camera? Are they going to be able to offer something interesting and not just, read from, a script the entire time? So it's figuring out what those nuances look like. And I know that's probably a long way of saying of, yeah, we're refining some things, but it's more going to be topic driven. Going back to, I used to work in a magazine where we would plan out, our issues, 4 months in advance, and we would have a central theme around one issue for the month. And then we would build the topics around that. That's where I see the podcast going, where I have a central issue, a central topic, and then that way I can fit in the subject matter expertise and also the news angles as well. Because I think you need to have a multi-pronged approach when you're approaching, content marketing just in general. So you can have that evergreen content and then also have that news content that, will blend the audiences together.
Well, I think you got it dialed in, Blythe. So, last question, a little bit of a wild card for you. Now, you kind of teased our audience a little bit about some of this sports and entertainment knowledge. So, I'm curious. We're coming in. We're at the halfway mark of the baseball season. We got football season right on the horizon. Favorite football player, NFL. Favorite baseball player. What are we looking at?
Oh, I'm NFL all the way. I used to be such a big baseball fan, but for whatever reason, COVID changed a lot of my sports viewing habits, and now I'm pretty much just all football. So NFL, anyone who is within arm's reach of me will know that I'm a Jaguars fan. I end every podcast with a "Go Jags." I have an entire, if you were watching on video, I have an entire just sort of display like ode to the Jaguars in the background of my videos. Up above, you can't see it, but is a giant Fred Taylor jersey that's game worn and signed. He's a former Jacksonville Jaguar running back.
Yeah.
I used to cover the team, so for local sports radio. So I'm a huge fan, born and raised, season ticket holder. I go to every single game with my dad for more than 20 years.
Wow.
So I could name a Legends Jaguar player that is my absolute favorite. But present day, I have to go with Trevor Lawrence because he, along with Doug Peterson, you got anytime you can have that head coach and star quarterback combo, and you can get that star quarterback on his rookie contract for those first few years and do something decent with the performance of the team, which we did have, last year, made it to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you can have it is very rare in the NFL to have that combo of the head coach and the young quarterback still on his rookie contract. So hopefully we can, make some waves here in this year and in the coming years, of course.
And hopefully we'll see Trevor on the Everything is Logistics podcast very soon. I'm sure we would all enjoy that. That's going to do
Heck
it
yeah.
for us in the hot seat, Blythe. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time.